Hey guys, tonight we take a slow, calm dive into the dusty world of the ancient Egyptian empire. A place of sun-baked deserts, towering pyramids, and gods with animal heads that make your pet look pretty normal. You're about to discover why you probably wouldn't last a day in this civilization, even if you could handle the relentless heat and the never-ending sand in your shoes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing this little global community come alive as the hours creep toward midnight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start the day in the bustling streets of Thebes, under a sun so bright it feels like the sky itself is trying to burn you alive. You walk past the towering obelisks, their hieroglyphs telling stories of pharaohs who ruled with godlike authority. You might imagine yourself as one of them until you realize your role is far less glamorous. The moment you step outside, the harsh reality of ancient Egyptian life hits you like a sandstorm. The air is dry, prickling your skin, and the smell of the Nile, mixed with livestock and cooking fires, fills your nostrils. Historians widely agree that the Nile was the lifeblood of Egypt, its flooding cycle dictating everything from planting crops to celebrating religious festivals. You think about how you'd spend your day, maybe toiling in the fields under the punishing sun, or working on the construction of those massive pyramids. Fun fact, many workers who built the pyramids weren't slaves, as popular culture suggests, but skilled laborers who lived nearby, receiving rations of bread and beer. Still, the work was grueling, and the sun was an unforgiving overseer. But you're not here for just the facts you already know. Imagine the bizarre beauty rituals. You smear crocodile dung as sunscreen. Yes, you heard that right, to protect your skin. Not exactly the spa day you dreamed of. Scholars debate how effective such mixtures really were, but it's clear Egyptians took personal care seriously, using scented oils and elaborate wigs to beat the heat and show status. As you walk further, into the marketplace, the colors explode around you. Fresh fruits, spices, linen cloths, and the chatter of merchants shouting deals. The economy revolves around barter and trade, and currency as we know it is centuries away. You try to bargain for some dates, but soon realize the social rules are strict. Crossing someone's path without respect could lead to a public scolding, or worse. Speaking of rules, Egyptian society was rigidly hierarchical. You're near the bottom, somewhere between a craftsman and a laborer, trying to keep your head down. The pharaoh rules with divine right, and even the scribes, those highly educated few, live a life far removed from yours. Education was rare, but scribes held power because they controlled knowledge and recorded history. The irony is not lost. While you struggle to survive, others carve your story into stone. Lunch is simple. Some flatbread and onions, washed down with beer brewed from barley. A staple drink of the time, surprisingly nutritious and far safer than water. You might think, that sounds dull. But in this dry climate, that beer is a lifeline. Still, you can't help but wish for a modern soda, or even a chilled bottle of water. You wander toward the temples where priests perform rituals that you barely understand. The Egyptians worship a complex pantheon, Ra, Osiris, Isis, and many others, each god with their own domain and personality. Some stories say that the gods created the world with magic words. Others claim these tales were political tools to keep order. Historians still debate the true origins and meanings of these myths. Before the sun sets, you're reminded of the looming presence of death, ever close in this harsh land. Mummification fascinates many outsiders, but you see it as a grim business, preserving bodies for an afterlife filled with judgment. The rich get lavish tombs with treasures, the poor get simple burials. You wonder if the afterlife is really as glamorous as it sounds, or just another way to cope with the finality of life. You realize that living in ancient Egypt means navigating a world filled with beauty and brutality, order and superstition. It's a delicate balance, and most days would leave you exhausted, overwhelmed, and dreaming of a soft bed far away from the sun. Stick around, because coming up, you'll learn about some of the strangest laws and punishments that could make your head spin and keep you awake, ironically. If you're enjoying this slow journey through time, a thumbs up really helps me keep making these videos for folks like you. For now, imagine yourself stepping back into the cool shade of a papyrus reed by the Nile, the sound of water gently lapping at your feet. Feel the calm settle as the stars begin to appear, promising a night that thankfully you get to sleep through. You wake up in the remains of a house made of sun-dried mud bricks, the thick walls trapping the heat of the previous day inside, almost like a slow oven. The smell of the Nile is present even here, mixed with the earthy aroma of clay and the subtle hint of old papyrus. You stretch, feeling the stiffness in your body from a heavy and brief sleep. After all, nights in ancient Egypt are rarely truly comfortable, even for those who are lucky enough to be there. Now, imagine the morning routine that awaits you. Getting up early to avoid the worst of the heat, a quick wash with river water, which, to be honest, might seem a little suspicious, since sanitation is something the Egyptians haven't fully mastered yet. You know it could cause illness, but for now it's what it's got. Historians still debate whether the river was a source of life versus a constant threat of contamination. You dress in a simple linen kilt, a cool fabric that was a real luxury for the time. Cotton would only come much later, so linen is king. There's no point in trying to wear cotton or polyester to resist the heat. Here you learn to embrace what nature offers, even if it can sometimes be a bit harsh on the skin. Remember that crazy sunscreen concoction made with crocodile dung? Well, the smell of fresh linen is almost a relief in comparison. In the village's central square, you can see workers getting ready for the day. Farmers are already starting to work their fields near the Nile, taking advantage of the fertility that the annual floods bring. The Egyptian calendar was closely tied to these floods, and they had specific months for planting, harvesting, and resting. A system so organized that some historians consider it to be one of the world's first agricultural calendars. You try to imagine yourself following this farming routine, but you soon realize that it's not that simple. The scorching sun makes you sweat profusely, and fresh water is scarce, so physical exertion is limited to conserve energy. Amid all this, an interesting fact. Egyptian children used a kind of whip made of reeds to keep the animals in the pasture, and sometimes adults used something similar to discipline the younger ones. This practice generates debate to this day about what was considered acceptable discipline versus abuse. Still in the market, things start to heat up, not only because of the sun, but also because of the increasing movement. The merchants display spices, perfumes made of myrrh and frankincense, and jewelry that shines like desert lights. You feel a mixture of fascination and weariness because you know that none of these riches are for you. Most common people barely have enough to eat, while the elite live surrounded by luxury and mystery. Here's a moment for a curiosity that seems straight out of a fairy tale. You know that idea that the Egyptians loved cats? They really did, and a lot. Cats were considered sacred animals that protected homes from evil spirits, and killing a cat even accidentally could mean severe punishment. Just imagine having to be careful, even with the neighborhood cat, to avoid getting in trouble with the law. You also remember that while you're in this turmoil, the hieroglyphic writing system we see on monuments is not for everyone. Only a minority, the scribes, learned to master this art, and it gave them status and power. Scholars still debate whether writing was more of a political tool or a genuine way to preserve knowledge and culture. At the end of the day, when the heat begins to ease and the shade finally lengthens, you return home. Dinner is simple: barley bread, perhaps some Nile fish and some vegetables. The custom of drinking beer remains firm, a constant that helps to hydrate and nourish at the same time. Egyptian beer was thick, almost like porridge, and had a very different taste than what we know today. Definitely a drink that challenges your modern palate. At night, as the village quiets down, you lie on your straw mat listening to the distant sound of the river and the occasional howl of jackals. The darkness in ancient Egypt had none of the comfort of electric light. The sky is a carpet of stars, and any noise seems amplified. It is a constant reminder that despite all the organization and cultural richness, life was fragile and full of challenges. So, could you handle another day like this? If you liked the video so far, How about leaving a comment telling me which part of the ancient Egyptian routine surprised you the most? And don't forget to give me a like so I know you want more stories like this. So, let's find out how laws and punishments worked in this ancient world. Brace yourself because some of them are pretty unusual. Stay with me. You wake up for what would be a normal day in ancient Egypt, but you soon realize that their normal may be quite different from yours. Egyptian laws are strict, often harsh, and no, we're not talking about speeding tickets or parking tickets. You could end up being punished for things that would seem absurd today, like stealing grain or even insulting an official. Back then, justice wasn't just a matter of the courtroom, but rather a social system that maintained order in the cosmos, something the Egyptians called mate, the essence of truth, justice, and balance. Imagine, for example, that you accidentally knocked over a jar in your neighbor's house. In modern times, you could apologize, pay for the damage, and move on. In Egypt, however, depending on the jar, the punishment could be much harsher, from a public beating to a temporary imprisonment. Some historians still debate whether the punishments were more about maintaining social order or whether they reflected a deeply held moral code. You are walking through the village streets and you hear a murmur coming from the local courthouse, where cases are tried before officials in formal attire. The atmosphere is tense, and people around you are quietly talking about the latest ruling, which involved a public punishment for a food thief. In those days, theft was a very serious crime because in an agricultural society dependent on the Nile's crops, food was literally the difference between life and death. But don't think that all punishments were simple or cruel. Some were curiously elaborate, almost bizarre by modern standards. For example, if you were caught committing certain minor crimes, you might be forced to wear a specific type of hat, actually a kind of embarrassing mask or headdress, during the day as a form of public humiliation. It's an ancient form of shaming that's curiously similar to today's social media, where the fear of public judgment is the most common. The judicial system also had something that seems modern to us, the possibility of appeal, at least for the most serious cases. This shows that ancient Egypt already had complex notions of justice, even if applied within a cultural and religious context very different from ours. And believe me, to this day, historians debate whether these appeals really had an impact or if they were more of a symbolic gesture. Now let's talk about something you might not expect: punishments for religious offenses. Religion was the cornerstone of Egyptian life, and any serious offense against the gods could result in severe punishments, including exile or the destruction of property. Just imagine the pressure to avoid any ritual lapses. Religion permeated every sphere, and you lived in constant fear of displeasing the gods, especially Ra, the sun god, whose wrath was feared by all. And of course, the punishment for false prophets or those who challenged the authority of the priests could be dire. This is because the priests were not only spiritual leaders, but also wielded political and economic power. So if you said something that questioned the status quo, you had better be prepared to face consequences. As you observe all this, one question remains: did these punishments really maintain order, or did they create an environment of constant fear? This is one of the great discussions among scholars who are still trying to understand how Egyptian justice worked in the daily lives of ordinary people. Oh, and before I forget, if you're enjoying this dive into the mind and laws of ancient Egypt, why not share in the comments what you find strangest or most surprising about these punishments? And if you're enjoying it, the like button is right there below waiting for you. In the next section, we'll find out how medicine worked back then. And get ready, because Egyptian doctors had methods that would make anyone today raise an eyebrow. Stay with me for this fascinating journey. You wake up feeling a little unwell, perhaps with a headache or a sprained ankle. In ancient Egypt, seeking medical help was not a simple matter, but rather a mix of science, magic, and faith in the gods. Egyptian doctors were experts, but their tools and treatments may seem quite strange to you. Just imagine, instead of a pharmacy with standardized remedies, you find a doctor who recites incantations while applying poultices made from ingredients like crocodile fat, honey, and even animal excrement. Egyptian medicine is known for being one of the most advanced in the ancient world. They knew, for example, how to perform basic surgeries, treat wounds, and even make prosthetics. One famous pharaoh wore a prosthetic finger made of wood. But before you imagine a modern doctor, it's important to remember that many practices were still steeped in religious beliefs. Historians still debate whether prayers and rituals actually influenced healing, or whether they were merely a psychological supplement for the patient. If you had a toothache, for example, you wouldn't expect just a painkiller. You might be prescribed a magic charm or even a spell to ward off the evil spirit responsible for your suffering. At the same time, the prescription might include a mixture of curious ingredients, such as honey, mandrake root, and ash, mixed into a poultice placed in your mouth. Have you ever used something like that for a toothache? Probably not, right? Now here's a fun fact. There are records of an Egyptian doctor named Hesi-Ra, who is considered one of the first doctors in history, and he even had an official title, something like Chief of Dentists and Physicians, and he probably never imagined that millennia later we would be curious about his routine and techniques. On the other hand, not all treatments were effective, and some could even be dangerous. For example, the use of lead in skin ointments, something that we now know to be toxic. This makes us wonder if at times more than a medical treatment, the patient was receiving a placebo or a dose of hope to get better. Now imagine the role of the doctor in the community. He was not only a healer, but also a wise, respected man who perhaps carried the burden of saving lives while balancing science and superstition. And of course, the stories of doctors who were also priests reinforce this connection between healing and faith. Medicine in ancient Egypt also included practices that we now call psychosomatic. For example, illnesses that we now know to have emotional causes were treated with rituals to ward off evil spirits. In your modern-day life, have you ever felt that a conversation or a prayer helped more than medicine? Perhaps the Egyptians were more right than we imagine. Oh, and before I forget, if you enjoy this mix of history, science, and a touch of mystery, leave a comment telling us which ancient remedy you'd like to try or avoid. And if you're enjoying the video so far, why not give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes? Now stay with me because we're going to explore what daily life was like in the fields of the Nile. And, spoiler alert, it wasn't just planting and harvesting. Get ready to discover the daily life of an Egyptian peasant and how the river was literally the vein of civilization. You step out of the shadow of the temple and into the fields of the Nile, where the life of the common Egyptian really happens. Imagine yourself wearing a light linen robe, feeling the warmth of the sun beating down on your skin as you watch the golden grains sway in the breeze. The Nile River is not just a pretty landscape, it is the life force that shapes all existence around it. In ancient Egypt, agriculture depended entirely on the annual flooding of the Nile. These waters flooded the land and left nutrient-rich soil, perfect for growing wheat, barley, and flax. You didn't have to worry about modern irrigation because nature itself did the hard work for you. But this flood cycle could also be unpredictable. Historians still debate whether fluctuations in the Nile's level directly influenced the rise and fall of the Egyptian empire. After all, without water, without crops, without food, no kingdom can survive. Now, think about manual labor. Men, women, and children working together, cultivating the land, harvesting the crops, and preparing the harvest. It wasn't easy or quick work. Imagine that you could walk miles a day, handle rudimentary tools, and bear the weight of community expectations. An oddity, some workers wore sandals made of woven papyrus, which protected their feet from the scorching heat of the ground. Something that you probably don't find very comfortable today, but that made all the difference back then. Have you ever heard of the Nile Thanksgiving Festival? At certain times of the year, everyone would stop to celebrate the gift of the waters. It was a kind of festival with music, dancing, food, and offerings. These events strengthened the sense of community and, of course, served as a welcome break from the arduous cycle of agriculture. If you were living there, your routine would not be all about hard work. Rest and leisure also had their place, and stories and legends were told to keep the culture alive. You might even feel a little lucky because, even in those harsh times, the connection with the river and nature brought a comfort that today, in the midst of concrete and screens, we sometimes forget. It is worth remembering that despite the importance of the peasant, Egyptian society was strongly hierarchical. While you struggled to ensure food for everyone, the pharaohs and nobles enjoyed banquets and luxury, a reality that still generates debates among historians about social justice at that time. Oh, and speaking of luxury, have you ever thought that a simple piece of bread for you could have an ancient origin? Bread was so important that, in some tombs, mummified bread was found to ensure that the deceased would have sustenance in the afterlife. Before you get too carried away with the work in the fields, remember that this connection to the Nile cycle was sacred. If you find all this fascinating, leave a comment telling me whether or not you could survive the pace of farming life in ancient Egypt. And of course, don't forget to give me a like if you want me to continue taking you to this distant but vibrant world. Ready to move on to the next part of our journey? Now let's move on to what really keeps society going. The religion and gods of ancient Egypt, who were present in everything from birth to death. You enter a majestic temple with tall columns and walls covered in colorful hieroglyphics that tell stories of gods and pharaohs. Religion in ancient Egypt is not just a belief, but a constant presence in your daily life. Everything you do, think, and feel is connected to the gods. Imagine breathing in the incense-laden air and hearing the low sound of the priests chanting as you walk through the sacred courtyard. In ancient Egypt, the gods are not distant entities. They interact with you at all times. Ra, the sun god, is the one who brings light and warmth to the earth, while Isis takes care of fertility and family protection. You would need to learn a huge list of deities to avoid making a mistake. After all, offending a god was practically an invitation to personal disaster. Historians still debate whether the popularity of certain gods changed more due to political influence or cultural needs. But the important thing for you to understand is that this devotion shaped the entire society. You'll probably find it interesting that many of the gods had animal forms, like Anubis, the jackal-headed god who watched over the dead. This syncretism between human and animal was part of the Egyptian vision of balance and order in the universe. To you this may seem strange, but to them it was natural, as if the gods were very close, almost tangible. Inside the temple, you can see the altar where the priests make offerings of food, incense, and even wine, all to please and gain divine protection. And here's a quirky curiosity. The priests had to follow strict rules of purity, which included not eating onions or garlic, because they believed that these foods could disrupt their connection with the gods. No garlic in the priest's diet then. Who would have thought that even in the past there was a garlic law? You know that the Egyptians believed deeply in the afterlife. All their efforts to live righteously were tied to the hope of an eternal existence in the afterlife. To this end, mummification was essential, a complex process that preserved your body so that your soul could continue its journey. Historians still debate the extent to which this ritual was accessible beyond the pharaohs and nobles, but for you, an ordinary citizen, preparing for death was a daily concern. Between offerings, the priests taught people to respect ma'at, the concept of truth, justice, and harmony. You needed to live in balance because disrupting this order could cause chaos, and no one wanted that. If you're enjoying learning about these interesting facts about Egyptian religion, leave a comment telling us which god you found most interesting and why. Oh, and if you haven't liked the video yet, now's a good time to show your support. It'll help bring you more stories like this. Now that you have felt the sacred atmosphere of the temple, prepare to learn how ordinary people lived there, routines from birth to old age, and what customs shaped daily life in ancient Egypt. You wake up early, well before sunrise, while the cool breeze still blows along the Nile. Daily life in ancient Egypt begins with the distant sound of birds and the rush of water lapping the banks of the river, the very lifeblood of civilization. You get up to help with the farming, for agriculture is the heart of the Egyptian economy. The soil around the Nile is fertile thanks to the annual floods that bring nutrient-rich mud, but the time to plant is short, and you have to hurry. You probably don't realize that the word pharaoh didn't always mean king. It only came into use later, and at first it was a title indicating the royal house. Still, all ordinary Egyptians recognized the pharaoh as a quasi-divine leader, the intermediary between the gods and the people. Historians still debate the real power of the pharaoh. Did he rule with an iron fist, or was he more of a symbol? In between daily tasks, you encounter neighbors and family members, many of whom are artisans, merchants, or priests. Women have important roles in the home and in the field, but most public decisions are in the hands of men, although there are notable exceptions, such as some queens who ruled with authority. An interesting fact: the Egyptians used makeup. Yes, not just for beauty, but for protection. The famous kohl, that dark eyeliner you see in the pictures, was used to protect the eyes from the strong sun and also to ward off diseases, like a kind of ancient sunscreen. It may seem strange today, but it was a combination of style and health. You'll also discover that the diet in ancient Egypt was simple but nutritious. Bread, beer, vegetables, and fresh fish from the Nile formed the basis of the diet. Meat was rare and reserved for special occasions. Historians still debate whether beer was consumed more as a beverage or as a nutritional supplement, which is good news for you after all. A little beer for your health doesn't seem so bad. Oh, and before you forget, if you're enjoying this trip back in time, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. This will help us continue to bring you stories that make you think and relax. And tell me in the comments which part of the Egyptian routine you would find the hardest to live. Now, as you finish your simple breakfast, prepare to discover how education and writing shaped the destiny of this ancient civilization. You are sitting under a palm tree, trying to escape the heat that is already beginning to intensify. A child runs in front of you, holding a piece of wood with crude drawings on it. It is not just any toy, it is one of the first lessons in writing. In ancient Egypt, writing was more than a useful skill. It was a form of power. As a peasant, you would probably never learn to write. Only a very small elite have this privilege, and scribes are highly respected, a kind of programmer of the time, mastering a code that few understand. And get this, writing in hieroglyphics is practically a superpower. Each symbol represents a sound, an idea, a word, sometimes all of these at the same time. Just to complicate matters a bit, there are also hieratic and demotic, more simplified versions of the system. Historians still debate whether scribes really understood all the symbols they copied. Some believe that many simply repeated patterns, almost automatically, without understanding their full meaning. Like when you paste a code without knowing what you are doing. Training begins early, often as early as age 5. The student must copy endless lists of words and phrases, using brushes and papyrus, or at first pieces of broken pottery called ostraca. I bet you never imagined that fragments of vases could become school notebooks. You see a young student being scolded by his teacher for misspelling the symbol for cow. A mistake like that can change the meaning of an entire text. Imagine writing offer milk to the gods and ending up saying, sacrifice a sacred cow. The last thing you want to do is anger a god with a spelling mistake. Education is not about creativity, but about repetition. No free writing. The important thing is to know how to copy contracts, prayers, tax lists, and magic formulas accurately. Scribes work for the government, temples, and even armies, keeping records vital to the functioning of society. You hear an old scribe grumbling about how nobody respects hieroglyphics like they used to. A complaint that, if you think about it, could easily be heard from a modern-day professor talking about emojis. And speaking of emojis, the Egyptians loved symbols. You'll notice that almost every object has an image or text engraved on it, like an obsession with recording everything. Temples, tombs, amulets, mirrors. Everything becomes a space for visual communication. And here's an oddity. Some famous scribes had their own personal seals, as if they were artist logos. Not exactly Instagram influencers, but with a similar status. Before moving on to the next part of your day, here's an invitation. Tell me in the comments if you could learn hieroglyphics with just pieces of pottery and a reed dipped in ink. I honestly would have given up after the first week. Now stand up slowly, because you are about to experience the true soul of Egypt. The temples, the rituals, and the relationships with the gods. A world where everything has meaning, and nothing is as it seems. You arrive at the entrance to a large temple. The columns rise like petrified palm trees, covered in deep carvings that tell stories of gods, kings, and monsters. A stone book that no one will carry around, but everyone will respect. The smell of incense hangs in the air, mixed with something more metallic, perhaps dried blood. Yes, sacrifices are part of the routine. Here in ancient Egypt, religion is not just faith. It is organization, science, politics, and everyday life. Everything is tied to the gods. The flooding of the Nile, the harvest, birth, the cold you caught yesterday. Even tripping over a stone can have spiritual implications. Literally anything can be interpreted as a divine sign, including a fart. Yes, there are records of oracles interpreting even gases as omens. Inside the temple, you'll notice that the priests aren't exactly isolated monks. They're more like administrators, scientists, and doctors. They oversee the calendar, the rituals, the medicines, and of course the offerings. One interesting detail: some priests shave their entire bodies, head, eyebrows, even nose hair. This is because ritual purity requires a body free of any dirt or stray hair. You see a ritual being prepared. A white calf is being examined more closely than a used car is being sold. Any imperfection, a crooked tooth, a hair out of place, makes the animal invalid as an offering. The gods do not accept second-rate offerings. The ritual music begins and you feel the drums in your chest. The dance, the sacred words, the symbolic clothing, everything has a specific role. Even as a mere observer, are participating, breathing in this dense atmosphere of faith, power, and repetition. Historians still debate whether the rituals were truly understood by everyone involved, or whether many simply repeated them out of tradition, like someone singing the national anthem without thinking much about the words. There is something comforting about following ancient formulas, even if you don't fully understand why. Between prayers, a priest offers you a drink made with barley and honey, a kind of sacred energizer. You hesitate, but accept. It's surprisingly sweet, but with a strange undertone, something like dubious fermentation. Your lips tingle a little. Yeah, maybe you're not used to Egyptian potions. You notice something on the altar, a small statue of a god with the head of a falcon. It is Horus, god of the heavens. Beside him is Isis, his mother, goddess of magic and motherhood. And further on, a figure with the head of a jackal, Anubis, the guardian of the dead. This whole divine family is like a TV series, full of intrigue, betrayal, revenge, and resurrection. A true Game of Thrones and papyrus. Oh, and remember the crocodile dung sunscreen? Well, it was also used in rituals for spiritual protection, a practical and symbolic combination that only an Egyptian would understand. You take a deep breath, absorbing the ancient weight of these walls. And before you move on, I'll ask you a simple favor. If this experience is stirring your imagination, please like and subscribe to the channel. I promise to continue guiding you through places like this, where time slows down and history whispers in the darkness. Now, with the blessing of the gods, and perhaps a little sickness from the potion, it's time to visit an even more curious part of Egypt: medicine. Spoiler: it involves things like rotting flesh, magical tattoos, and lots of linen. Lots of linen. You're lying on a straw mat, staring up at the cracked ceiling of a small room. Light streams in through the narrow windows, but it doesn't ease your sense of discomfort. Your stomach is growling, your body is feverish, and your throat feels coated with desert sand. Congratulations, you're sick. And in ancient Egypt, that could be a once-in-a-lifetime experience. In the sense of unforgettable and also probably terminal. Enter Sunw, the Egyptian physician. He wears a clean robe, carries a linen bag, and has on his face that expression of someone who firmly believes that healing begins with the balance between body and spirit. You don't know if this is comforting or frightening, considering that one of the first things he does is smell your breath. Literally, to detect illness. It seems that breath, like the gods, does not lie. The treatment begins with a prayer to Isis. Yes, medicine and religion are Siamese twins here. After the prayer, he takes out a vial of something that looks like molasses. And it is. A mixture of honey, animal fat, and possibly the feces of some sacred being. You try to get up, but it's too late. He's applying the mixture to your chest, with all the solemnity of a Renaissance artist. Welcome to the pharmacy of the Nile. Some of the most commonly used ingredients include garlic, onions, myrrh, beer, and yes, rotten meat. Some texts recommended putting old meat on wounds to drive out evil spirits. If you survived, it was a cure. If not, it was probably possession. Easy to justify. Fun fact of the day, there were recipes for just about everything, from curing baldness with lion or hippopotamus fat to preventing hair from growing too much with cat dung. Clearly, ancient Egypt was an expert in the ultimate solution, but there were also practical solutions. The Egyptians already performed simple surgeries, knew how to suture wounds, and even used splints for fractures. There are mummies with evidence of amputations that were well cauterized. By the standards of the time, this was cutting-edge medicine, and the medicines were all catalogued. The famous Ebers papyrus, with over 700 formulas, was a veritable manual. Of Egyptian pharmacy. Just don't expect to find Tylenol there, but there are plenty of combinations with wine and donkey milk. At least you'll get drunk while trying to get better. Historians still debate whether Egyptian doctors really understood what they were doing, or whether they were simply repeating time-honored recipes without question. The truth may lie somewhere. In between, empirical experience mixed with a good touch of mysticism and trial and error. And sometimes more error than trial. You start to feel a little better. It could be the placebo effect, or it could be the horizontal position. Or maybe it's the fact that the doctor is now drawing little protective symbols in black ink on your wrist, a form of healing magic that doubles as an amulet. It's almost like getting a meaningful tattoo, only in charcoal. Remember that. Smell of incense from the temple. Well, it's here too, now mixed with the strong aroma of the ointment that covers your chest. It's an olfactory festival, and you're the guest of honor. When you ask how you'll know if you're cured, the doctor smiles and says that if you dream of a smiling god, it's a good sign. If not, well, he can always try another recipe with snake fat. What a relief, right? Oh, and an important note. Women could also be doctors, especially midwives and fertility specialists. Some gynecological prescriptions involved bread soaked in urine and inserted into the body. And you thought today's drugstore tests were invasive. Maybe the hardest part is resting with all that smell and heat, but let's try. And since we've come this far, how about writing in the comments what was the most bizarre home remedy you've ever used? Maybe someone will find an Egyptian parallel. Relax. Take a deep breath. The worst is over. But before you go to sleep, we have one last stop. Before we talk about death, everyday life. Because between pyramids and potions there were ordinary days, ordinary people. And far from divine concerns. The sun is no longer so hot outside, and you finally sit up, propped up on a linen cushion. The smell of ointment still fills your nostrils, but at least you've stopped breaking out in a cold sweat. A child runs, past outside shouting something you don't understand. And for a moment you remember that the world goes on, even when you're sick. It's time to experience ancient Egypt, like an ordinary citizen, on an ordinary day. Yes. You are not a pharaoh. You are not a priest. You are not even a scribe. You are just you. And today the day begins early. The rooster crows, or is it an ibis? And you rise at first light. No alarm, no nap, no coffee. Just the sound of boatmen beginning to row on the Nile and the smell of fresh bread coming from the kitchen. His house is modest, made of dry clay bricks. There is no furniture beyond the essentials. A mat to sleep on, a low table, perhaps a wooden bench. The utensils are simple but effective. Everything smells like smoke, dust, and goat. Because, of course, there's a goat in the corner of the room. Breakfast is barley bread with beer. Yes, beer early in the morning. But don't get carried away. It's weak, thick, and slightly sour. Something between soup and bread juice. Nutritious, yes. Delicious, not so much. You chew in silence, looking out the open door. Outside, neighbors begin to emerge with tools, pots, and baskets. If you're a farmer, you'll have a long day. Irrigating your fields requires coordination with the canal system, which is one of the reasons for the success of ancient Egypt. Without the Nile and its rhythmic ebb and flow, nothing would flourish. You work with a simple wooden tool, stirring up the earth that's already hardened under the sun. And watch out for pests. Locusts and snakes are no joke. If you are a craftsman, your workspace is a small, poorly ventilated workshop, You carve stone, sculpt wood, make earthenware jewelry, all with precision and patience, and always with an eye on the customer who might complain if the lucky charm comes out crooked. Now, if you're lucky, or have influential friends, you might be a scribe. That means shadows, papyrus paper, and long hours copying religious text or tax records. A blissful tedium compared to ploughing in the sun. But don't think it's easy. One wrong letter can change the name of a god, or create a new tax. Historians still debate whether scribes were truly respected for their erudition, or just feared for recording debts. Fun fact of the day, there were even taxes on fishing. And if you were caught trying to hide fish in your clothes, yes, this happened, you could be fined or beaten. Depending on the collector's mood, lunch arrives with more bread, perhaps some onions, figs, dates, and, if it's a good day, a piece of dried fish. There is no official rest period, but the hottest hours of the day are usually respected as a time for a break. You hide in the shade, share food with a colleague, and watch the birds fly high over the field. In the afternoon, work continues until sunset. You return home exhausted, and perhaps stop by the river to wash. If it is a day of worship, you might visit a small local shrine, something simple but filled with incense and soft chanting. You offer a handful of barley and give thanks for another day alive. After all, that in itself was cause for celebration in ancient Egypt. At home at night, the light is provided by oil lamps. Children play with clay toys or small games with dice. The elders tell stories about gods, heroes, or gossipy neighbors. The sound of the Nile in the background provides a soundtrack to the conversation. And yes, you're probably scratching your head because of lice. But don't worry, there's an ointment for that too. Probably made with goose fat and ox urine. You lie back down on the mat. Tomorrow will be the same, or maybe not. There might be a visit from a tax inspector, a sandstorm, or a festival in honor of Hathor, the goddess of music and dance. Life in ancient Egypt was simple, but never exactly predictable. And speaking of which, if you're enjoying this immersion into the Egyptian routine, consider leaving a like and commenting on which part of your modern day would be hardest to give up in this reality. No Wi-Fi, no air conditioning, or no coffee. Now close your eyes for a moment. The noise of the day slowly fades away, and all that remains is the rustle of the wind through the palm trees. But nights don't always end like this. Sometimes they end up in court, and that's exactly what we'll explore next. The stars are rising over the desert, but your night is not over yet. Because, unfortunately, you are being summoned, not to a dinner, not to a party. You have been summoned to appear at a hearing at the local courthouse. Yes, in ancient Egypt, courts weren't just reserved for major crimes or heresies worthy of angry gods. They also ruled on everyday disputes, fights over land, stolen tools, unpaid debts, even gossip that got out of hand. And today you're being accused of stealing a goat. You didn't steal the goat, of course, but your neighbor, the one who's been jealous of you ever since you built a working cistern, swore he saw you looking intently at the animal. Suspicious intent, according to him. That's it. That's the basis of the case. The court takes place in a simple, open-air space, sometimes inside a temple courtyard. The judges are usually trained scribes who apply what is called mat, the concept of truth, balance, and divine justice. But don't be fooled. If you find yourself in the good graces of someone influential, it's more mat for you. If not, good luck. You sit on the floor next to other defendants. One of them seems to be there for insulting his mother-in-law, another because he let an ox escape and destroyed a crop. Everyone waits nervously for the judge to arrive. The A. Scribe begins to unroll a long papyrus. And of course everyone speaks at the same time. It's like an internet forum, but with fewer emojis and more sandals. When your turn comes, the judge looks at you with boredom. Your neighbor presents his argument. He felt in his heart that the goat would be stolen. You indignantly say that you don't even have a place to keep a goat. You can barely store your own food. The judges talk to each other in low voices. One of them laughs quietly. The verdict: you won't be punished, but you will have to pay a fee for suspicious intent. That's right. Welcome to the old-fashioned justice system, where even things you didn't do can cost you dearly. Historians still debate whether these trials were more formal or more like community mediation. But one thing is certain. Ancient Egyptian courts could be as bizarre as the disputes they adjudicated. There were even recorded cases of people suing others for witchcraft and bringing clay dolls as evidence. Fun fact of the day: a royal document shows a man accusing his wife of using spells to make him lose his virility. The judge ordered them both to undergo a purification ritual and an offering at the temple of Isis. Imagine taking a spiritual bath because your wife thought you were a bit slow. But not every trial ended with light punishments or fines. If the crime was serious, like grave robbing, which was a serious crime, the punishment could include flogging, amputation, or even execution. Egyptian justice might be symbolic, but it wasn't exactly kind. In your case, you return home more relieved than angry. The goat is still there, grazing calmly, oblivious to the legal drama it has caused. You walk past it, cross your arms, and whisper, "Next time, cooperate." As you lie down on the mat again, it is impossible not to think, how did such an advanced civilization manage to transform even the most banal problems into epics worthy of papyrus? Perhaps because, for them, everything was part of the cosmic order. His every action was a mini battle between chaos and harmony. Now that you've survived the trial, with your honor and your fingers intact, you enjoy the cool breeze coming through the poorly fitted wooden window. And you think, maybe tomorrow you'll go to the market, or maybe something more unexpected will happen. By the way, if you have ever had to deal with an absurd injustice in your life, comment below. Who knows, your story might become a modern version of an Egyptian court script. But don't think your journey is nearing its end. Egypt still has more surprises in store for you. For example, what if you woke up as a priest tomorrow? You wake up earlier this time, with a strong scent of incense in the air. Something is different. You're not on your usual mat. You're lying on a cool stone surface in a quiet room filled with columns and colorful murals. Someone dresses you in a white robe and hands you a bowl of water with floating lotuses. Congratulations. You are now a temple priest. How did this happen? Don't ask. Egyptian dreams are confusing like that. But now that you're here, you'll have to follow a strict, almost military-style routine. Being a priest doesn't mean meditating all day while petting sacred cats, although yes, you will do that sometimes. It means, above all, discipline. Your day begins with a ritual bath, then another, and another. Cleanliness is obsessive. Your body must be absolutely pure before you even enter the inner sanctum of the temple. Historians still debate whether this obsession was purely religious or also a form of social status. After all, in Egypt, anyone who had time to take 5 baths a day was someone with influence. Your first task? Wake up the god statue. Yes, you read that right. Waking up the statue. Every day you open the doors of the dark sanctuary where the image of the deity is kept. Clap your hands softly and start singing good morning hymns. It's like working in a 5-star hotel, except your guest is a god with the head of a falcon. After that, you bathe the statue with perfumed water. You dry it with fine linen, you perfume it with expensive oils, and you dress it in new clothes. All of this without ever looking directly into its eyes. After all, it would be disrespectful. Or, depending on the god, a way to melt its soul. And why all this? Because the Egyptian gods were treated as real, present, and demanding people. They didn't just rule the invisible world, they also had routines, moods, appetites, and of course high standards of hygiene. Throughout the day you participate in several ceremonies: incense burning, chanting, food offerings. The food, in fact, was offered to the gods and then collected to be redistributed among the priests, which is basically the sacred version of self-service. And yes, many gods had favorite dishes. Bastet, for example, loved dried fish. Thoth was more of a fan of sweets with honey. Eccentric curiosity of the day, there were priests who specialized only in caring for sacred animals, like Sobek's crocodiles or Bastet's cats. They were fed ritually, adorned with jewelry, and when they died were mummified with more care than many pharaohs. The life of a priest also includes managing the temple's assets. And that, my dear, is true power. Egyptian temples were not just places of faith. They were incredibly rich institutions. They controlled land, collected taxes, employed thousands of people. Being the chief scribe of a temple was like being the CEO of a multinational corporation, only with more hieroglyphics. But of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. As a priest, you can't have sex during certain periods. You have to shave your entire body regularly. Yes, even your eyebrows. And you have to follow a strict diet with no fish on certain dates. Outward purity reflects inner purity, they say. You end the day exhausted, sitting in the shade of a papyrus-shaped column, watching the golden sunset reflected in the waters of the Nile. The breeze blows slowly, carrying the sweet scent of myrrh, incense. A cat rubs against your legs, purring, and in that moment between the sacred and the everyday, you realize that being a priest in ancient Egypt wasn't just about praying, it was about maintaining order in the universe, literally. Every little gesture you made was a way of keeping chaos at bay. The world didn't keep turning on its own. It was you and your rituals that ensured the dawn of the next day. So tell me, would you survive this sacred routine, or would you faint on your third shower of the day? If you enjoyed this part of the journey, comment below which god you would have the most affinity with. Anubis, Osiris, Isis. Maybe we'll draw your imaginary temple in a future episode. And now, priesthood fulfilled, perhaps it's time for a little more adventure. Or, who knows, a visit to an ancient Egyptian physician. You blink and you're in a different room. This time the air smells strongly of onions, myrrh and blood. Don't be alarmed. It's just an Egyptian doctor's office. Or more precisely, a SWMW as they called it. Yes, you're the patient. Now, you try to get up, but someone is already placing a pasty mixture on your shoulder. It's warm and dripping slowly. It's made with honey, animal fat, and what looks like moldy bread. Curious? Well, the Egyptians may have been the first to use antibiotics, even though they didn't know what they were. Historians still debate whether the choice of moldy bread was intentional because of its medicinal properties, or just a lucky coincidence. Of time and climate. You sit on a wooden bench while the doctor recites passages from an ancient papyrus. Yes, treatment always has a spiritual component. After all, illness is imbalance, and imbalance involves the gods. So while he applies compresses to your injured ankle, he is also asking Isis to bring harmony back to your body. Oh, and don't forget the onion. Yes, onion. It's in everything. They used onions as a purifier, medicine, amulet, and sometimes even as a form of payment. Literally. Your doctor may accept onions as a consultation fee. Don't try that with your modern health insurance plan. You look at the instruments on the table. Some are made of brass and very sharp. Others look like ice cream scoops. There are tweezers, knives, probes, and even something that looks frighteningly like forceps. You can imagine what might happen if you said, "I have a toothache." Marginal curiosity, the Thebes papyrus, one of the oldest medical treatises in the world, lists more than 700 formulas and treatments. Some include women's milk, lizard blood, and boiled tree bark. It was a mix of science, superstition, and desperate attempt. Do you have a tickling sensation in your ears? Don't worry, it could just be a parasitic worm. The Egyptians ate a diet rich in raw fish and contaminated water, so intestinal infections, inflamed eyes, and worms were common. Your doctor will probably prescribe a bitter infusion of bay leaves, or a series of prayers to the goddess Sekhmet. In fact, Sekhmet was the goddess of healing and war, because apparently, if healing doesn't work, the internal war can. Take care of the problem. You're led into a dark room to rest after your treatment. In the corner, another patient groans softly. You recognize the smell. Hot resin, linen. Someone is being prepared for mummification. Yes, doctors and embalmers sometimes worked side by side. After all, if the treatment doesn't cure you, they need to make sure you're presentable for the afterlife. Historians point out that Egyptian doctors were specialists in certain parts of the body. There was, for example, a doctor of the rectum. And yes, he did exactly what you're imagining. In Egypt, medicine was taken as seriously as architecture, and that says a lot. The doctor finishes his treatment with a light touch on your chest. He tells you that your energy is out of balance, but that it will return soon. You thank him with a gesture of gratitude, but you feel dizzy. Maybe from the smell of crushed garlic, or maybe from the idea of having rat blood as part of the daily recipe. Now tell me the truth. Would you have the courage to face an ancient Egyptian treatment? Or would you have run away if you saw an onion being rubbed on your forehead? If this tour of the office of the past intrigued you, comment below what was the most bizarre treatment you've ever seen or heard about. And who knows, maybe we'll recreate it on our next night trip. With your body half healed, half scared, you move away from the temple, walking slowly through the streets of ancient Egypt, now enveloped by the smell of hot sand and promises of rest. But your journey is not over yet. You wake to the sound of copper bells tinkling in the wind. The sun begins to set behind the obelisks, painting the sky with orange hues that dance over the Nile. The heat subsides, and the air becomes more pleasant. But your day is not over yet. Now, it's time to attend a ceremony. You have been invited to a ritual at the Temple of Karnak, a privilege, but also a responsibility. You wear a clean, light white linen tunic. Linen, by the way, was almost sacred. The finer the material, the purer. You brush your hair with an ivory comb and apply a perfumed oil made of myrrh, cinnamon, and animal fat. Yes, you smell good, in their way. The procession begins. The temple floor is cool beneath your bare feet. The crowd moves in silence, with only the sound of drums and flutes filling the air. Statues of the gods are carried on golden platforms covered in lotus flowers and palm leaves. You hold a beeswax candle, and the flame dances as if trying to escape time. There, in the middle of the ceremony, you realize how much the Egyptians believed that everything in the universe needed to be in balance. Maat, the goddess of order, truth, and harmony, was more than an idea. She was a real force that guided life, death, and even taxes. And if you upset that balance, well, you better hope Anubis weighed your heart and found it light. The atmosphere is dense, but also strangely comforting. The chants echo off the stone walls, and the scent of incense fills your lungs. At one point, the high priest pours wine and milk into a small bowl, an offering to Horus, the falcon-headed god. You realize that everything here has meaning, even the silence. Interesting historical fact. Egyptian temples weren't just places of worship. They served as administrative centers, grain stores, schools, and even libraries. You're essentially in the Google Drive of antiquity, only with more scarabs. You sit among the other participants, listening to whispered stories about the gods. One tells of Osiris being dismembered and Isis sewing each piece together, with magic. Another says that Thoth wrote a book so powerful that anyone who read it would go mad, like a forbidden manuscript, but on papyrus. Historians still debate whether these myths were merely spiritual metaphors, or whether they concealed hidden truths that the priests truly believed. And then comes the moment of personal offering. You are invited to write, or at least draw, a request on a small clay tablet. Your request will be taken to the main altar. You hesitate. Write something simple: peace, rest, and perhaps a linen pillow. As you watch the flame of your candle slowly fade, you feel a deep calm. For the first time all day, the silence doesn't scare you. It welcomes you, as if all that chaos, heat, dust, and crocodile dung had led you right here, to this moment of quiet surrender. And then you lie down near the columns, watching the starry sky open like a papyrus above your head. It's not comfortable. It's not clean, but it's eternal. Now you can take a deep breath. The day is over, and even though ancient Egypt was unforgiving, it was also magical. With its hot sands, its ancient rituals, its animal-headed gods, and its onion-obsessed doctors. You survived, sort of. Maybe you wouldn't last a day there, but you lasted this night here, and sometimes that's more than enough. As you rest your head, imagine Ra's little boat sailing across the sky, pulling light to the other side of the world, where someone might be starting a new day. But here for you, everything slows down. The sounds fade away one by one. The distant drum, the soft flute, the rustling of the palm trees. You are safe. You are at peace. Imagine lying on a sacred barge, floating on the Nile at dawn, surrounded by stars and silence. The water gently touches the hull, and the whole world seems suspended in time like an ancient dream. It's time to let your mind rest too. Close your eyes if you haven't already. And remember, no matter how difficult the day may be, whether in ancient Egypt or the modern world, there will always be an inner temple where you can take refuge. Refuge.